For 26 years, Louisa Holt lived in plain sight. Her younger sister entered a room, and conversations stopped. Louisa entered the same room, and someone asked whether the tea had been served. Henriette collected compliments, the way spring collects blossoms, without trying, without noticing, without ever running out. Louisa collected something else: unpaid accounts, broken fences, worried servants. Every burden her family quietly set down in her hands and forgot they'd left there. By evening, everyone praised one daughter. By morning, they depended on the other. No one ever noticed the difference. No one, that is, but a stranger who hadn't even arrived yet. Then a sealed letter came, from one of England's oldest dukedoms. Within a week, one Holt sister would become a duchess. The county believed the choice had already been made. The Duke had something else in mind, something none of them would understand, until it was far too late to stop it. If you're watching this tonight, tell me where in the world you're tuning in from, and keep this question in your pocket, because by the end of this story, it's going to matter more than you think. What does a man really see when he looks at a woman the rest of the world has stopped looking at? Farnham Hall did not greet the autumn of 1817. It endured it. Rain found every gap in the window frames. Morning light fell across a breakfast table, where 4 pieces of toast had been rearranged twice. The teapot held mostly water, though no one said so out loud. 3 weeks earlier, Louisa had gone looking for a missing rent ledger in her father's desk. Instead, she found a second letter, already opened, already answered, in her father's hand, in terms she didn't understand and didn't dare ask about. She put it back exactly where she found it, careful to align the corners the way he'd left them. She hadn't stopped thinking about it since. "It is simply too dreary," Henriette announced, one finger tapping the tablecloth like a countdown to nothing. "If we do not get to London for the season, I shall wither." Sir Alister's shoulders dropped an inch. Lady Holt rearranged the toast a third time. Then Thomas entered, tray unpolished, a single letter resting on it. The seal was heavy, fresh, the kind that did not arrive at houses like Farnham by accident. The wax cracked. In a room this quiet, it was the loudest sound anyone had heard in a week. "Good God," Sir Alister breathed. "Father?" "Velmore." He said the name the way a starving man says bread. Henriette's chair scraped the floor. "What about him?" "His man of business proposes a contract. All outstanding debts settled. A swallow. In exchange for marriage. To my daughter." Henriette laughed, already certain which daughter he meant. Louisa's mind went quietly to a drawer, and a letter that had already been sitting there for weeks, waiting for someone to ask the right question about it. Whose idea was this? The Duke's, or her father's? "He arrives in 2 days," Sir Alister said, and was gone from the table before anyone could ask exactly what he had already agreed to on their behalf. He did not see his wife's face as he left. If he had, he might have noticed something too. A small folded receipt from a bath physician tucked inside her sewing box, for a tonic she had told no one she needed. By the second morning, the house had stopped pretending to be calm. "Not there," Henriette snapped at a maid struggling with a vase of hothouse flowers her father couldn't afford. "Nearer the window, so the light catches it when he walks in." She turned the vase herself, then turned it back. "No, there." In the hallway, Sir Alister stood before a looking glass, practicing a bow. "Your Grace." Too low. He tried again, higher. "Your Grace, welcome to Farnham." He caught his own reflection watching him, and looked away, embarrassed, like a man discovered talking to a ghost. In truth, he had been rehearsing something else entirely, the exact words he meant to say. If the Duke ever asked about a second offer, one he'd received back in September, from Lord Pemberton's solicitor, an offer he had quietly declined, and never told his wife about, he practiced burying that too. Behind the bow, in the kitchen garden, Louisa knelt in the mud beside the last of the roses, cutting the least wilted blooms for the guest suite. A young footman, new that season, crouched beside her. "Is it true he's never smiled, miss?" Not since his mother passed? I couldn't say, Louisa answered, but the question lodged itself somewhere she wouldn't be able to shake it loose from for weeks. Cook says the last housekeeper at Blackwood lasted 4 months. Left without notice. Said the whole house felt like a held breath. Cook says a great many things, but she cut the next rose more slowly than the one before it. A thorn caught the pad of her thumb. She didn't stop to look at it. By evening, the cut had already turned an angry pink no one but her would ever see. She found her father in the linen closet that afternoon, of all places, standing very still among the folded sheets, as though he'd forgotten what he'd come there for. "Papa?" "Nothing, my dear. Only thinking." He smiled too quickly, too brightly, the smile of a man shutting a door before anyone sees what's behind it. "You've done wonders with this house this week. You always do." It was, she would understand only much later, the closest her father ever came to confessing anything to her directly. At the time, she only straightened his cravat, the way she had since she was 12 years old, and left him to whatever he was carrying alone. She had no way of knowing yet that somewhere north of here, a man in morning clothes was already 3 miles closer to Farnole than anyone in this house believed, and that he was not arriving for the first time. Late on a gray Thursday, a single rider came, instead of a carriage, mud-spattered, leading his own horse toward the stables like a groom seeking work. "Rub him down, feed him well. I'm here on business for the Duke," Jonathan told the stable boy. Not quite a lie, not quite the truth. He kept to the shadow of a yew hedge. Through a gap in the garden wall, he found a stone bench, and on it, 2 women. "It is an outrage," the golden one was saying, "to be made to wait one more night. Do you have any notion how difficult it is to hold a state of perfect radiance for an entire afternoon?" The quiet one said nothing. "And this dress, a sleeve plucked between 2 fingers. Mama insists I wear it tonight. 3 years out of fashion. The Duke will think us paupers." "We are paupers, Henriette. No self-pity in it. A fact laid down like a stone." "They say he's very wealthy," Louisa murmured after a moment. "He had better be. Cold as a tomb, silent as a stone, probably ancient and wrinkled besides." A pause, calculating. "You'll come live with me, of course. Be my companion. You're so good at being quiet." Then, dropping her voice, delighted with herself, "But I'll tell you a secret, Lou. Once I'm settled, and the Duke has served his purpose, there's always Lord Ashworth. Far handsomer. A duchess may keep her little secrets, mayn't she?" Jonathan's jaw tightened behind the hedge. One sister had just confessed to a future betrayal. Out loud. Laughing. What had the other one been hiding for 3 weeks? In complete silence. He was turning to leave when the quiet one finally spoke. "You shouldn't say such things, Henriette. You're building a house on sand. A title isn't a home. Kindness is a home. Honesty is a home. Those things can't be bought." "Oh, Louisa, and your little sermons." Henriette rose, shook out her skirts, swept away in pink silk. Jonathan didn't move. He watched Louisa touch the last rose clinging to a dying bush, and then he watched her go still. Her hand paused on the petal. She glanced once, sharply, toward the hedge, as though she'd felt eyes on her and couldn't say from where. She didn't call out. She rose, smoothed her skirts, walked back toward the house, at a pace only slightly faster than before. Had she seen him? Or only sensed him? He didn't yet know she had, in fact, caught the shape of a man's boots beneath that hedge 2 nights running, and had said nothing to anyone, filing it away with the letter in the drawer. One more thing to watch, rather than ask about. He had one more reason to stay hidden. One he hadn't admitted even to himself yet. Something about the shape of her, kneeling in that mud with a bleeding thumb she never once complained about, that struck him as familiar in a way Farnole itself never could be. He told himself it was nothing. He was wrong. By noon the next day, when the carriage rolled up the drive and a tall man in unrelieved black stepped down, Louisa recognized the horse being led toward the stables before she recognized his face. The rider. The one who lied to a boy about whose business he was on. She said nothing. She was, after all, very good at being quiet. His gaze passed over Henriette's practiced smile, and did not stop. It found Louisa instead, and held. 1 second. 2. 3. You are Miss Louisa Holt. Not a question. I am, Your Grace. Does he know that I know? The contract, he said, loud enough for the whole hall to hear it, is for your hand in marriage. Henriette made a strangled sound. Your Grace, there must be some. The contract specifies. The contract specifies marriage to Miss Holt. You have 2 daughters. I am choosing the elder. Sir Alistair's face went the color of old paper. A fear that had nothing to do with disappointing a duke, and everything to do with a second letter, still hidden in a desk drawer upstairs. What does he know that I don't? Louisa placed her hand in Jonathan's, without asking permission from anyone in the room, including herself. I accept, Your Grace, she said, and the axis of her small world tilted on its hinge. She had no way of knowing that he had asked 3 separate servants, over 2 separate days, a question that had nothing to do with beauty at all. Which sister mended the tenant cottages after the storm? Which sister sat up nights with the accounts? Which daughter, when the food ran short, was always somehow the one who ate last? He already knew the answer, before he ever stepped down from that carriage. He had simply come to see her face. The week before the wedding was not the blur it might have been. Louisa made certain of that. She watched Jonathan cross the drawing room one afternoon and pause, without seeming to notice he'd done it, in front of a small portrait no larger than a hand mirror. A woman with dark hair, and the same stormy eyes he had. He didn't look at it long. He straightened it a half-inch, as though it had offended him by hanging crooked, and moved on. Your mother? My mother. Nothing more. He changed the subject to the weather so quickly. She understood, from the speed of it alone. This was a door she was not yet permitted to open. She let it close. For now. That evening, walking the garden path, he asked about Farnall's accounts, how she'd managed 3 winters on a budget that wouldn't have covered his stable feed for one. She told him plainly, which debts they'd let lapse, which they'd paid first, which tradesmen would still extend credit, and which would not. He listened the way other men listened to sermons they didn't believe they needed. You did all that. At what? 20? 21. And no one thanked you for it. It wasn't a question, so she didn't answer it. But something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile. The ground a smile might one day be built on. They didn't agree on everything. On the 3rd day, he suggested, carelessly, that once they reached Blackwood, she might wish to hire a companion, someone to occupy her hours, the way a duchess was generally expected to. I have occupied my own hours since I was 12 years old, she said, sharper than she intended. I do not require someone else to do it for me. He looked, for a moment, genuinely startled, not by her tone, by the realization that he had, without meaning to, offered her the exact life her sister had once offered her. Ornamental. Idle. Watched over. I meant it as a kindness, he said slowly. I know you did. That is what makes it worse. He didn't apologize outright. She would learn, in time, that he rarely did, in words. But the next morning, he arrived with the estate's account books under his arm, instead of a suggestion of a companion, and asked, gruffly, whether she might look them over with him, since she clearly had a head for figures he lacked the patience for. It was not an apology. It was, she understood, exactly the same thing wearing a different coat. She accepted it as such. He brought her a small parcel before the week was out. Not jewels. Not lace. A slim volume of botanical drawings he'd found in a York bookshop, the spine already a little worn, as though he'd read it himself on the ride back. For the roses, he said gruffly, and left before she could properly thank him. She kept the book on her nightstand for the rest of her life. They married on a crisp October morning. Her gown was dove gray, plainly cut, chosen over the modiste's protests. She said her vows steadily. He said his in a low rumble that seemed to move the air itself. Then, as they turned to leave the church, Louisa stepped forward to help an elderly tenant woman rise from her pew. Her heel caught the hem of her own gown. She stumbled. Her slipper struck the mud at the church steps, staining the pale silk to the ankle. 100 eyes watched to see what a duke would do. Jonathan knelt, in the mud, in front of the entire congregation of Farnall Parish, in his wedding coat. He took her ruined slipper in both hands and wiped it clean with his own handkerchief, unhurried, as though there were no one else in the church at all. The church went silent enough to hear the rain. Then he rose, offered his arm as though nothing at all had happened, and walked his wife to the carriage. It was the story every servant in 3 counties would tell for the next 20 years, long after the mine, long after the ballroom, long after anyone remembered the exact terms of the contract that started it. That was the moment people meant, when they said the Duke of Velmore had married for love. She did not look back as the carriage pulled away from Farnall. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, was that the scene that got you? Or is there a bigger one still coming? Because there is. Stay with me. Blackwood Manor rose out of the northern landscape like something the earth had grown rather than built. The staff lined up under the eye of a formidable housekeeper, Mrs. Graves, studying the plain gray bride with wary curiosity. That first dinner, they sat at opposite ends of a table long enough to require raised voices to cross it. Silence, thick as the untouched soup cooling between them. Is the meal to your liking? Excellent, thank you. But you needn't call me your grace. My name is Louisa. A pause longer than it should have taken. Then you must call me Jonathan. That night, alone in a bedroom vast enough for 4 people, she let herself feel the full weight of what she'd taken on, and understood that she still did not know why the door of this house had opened for her, and not her sister. She woke the next morning with a different resolve. She found the kitchens, introduced herself to a staff too startled to answer at once, and asked Mrs. Graves to show her the house from the ground up. The library first, Mrs. Graves said, before catching herself. That is, if your grace wishes. It's been shut up some years now. Not since... She stopped. Since his mother, Louisa finished. Mrs. Graves's mouth pressed into a thin, careful line. The look of a woman who has decided, on the spot, that this particular duchess is not to be gossiped to, however kindly meant. That is not mine to say, your grace. Was she kind? Louisa asked instead, choosing a question that didn't require betraying a confidence to answer. Something in the housekeeper's shoulders eased, just slightly. The kindest mistress I ever served. This house was a different place when she kept it. She said nothing further, but it was, Louisa thought, an answer of its own kind. That afternoon she found a small, dust-sheeted pianoforte in the corner of the library. Its lid closed, one key visibly worn pale by decades of a single hand's habit. She lifted the lid and pressed that one key, gently. The note rang out into a room that had not heard music in 5 years, and hung there a long moment before it died away completely. She closed the lid again, not out of respect, out of instinct. The sense that this was not yet a sound the house was ready to hear twice. She opened the curtains herself that afternoon, one by one, let the dust rise gold in the light, and waited to see whether her husband would notice. He did. He came home to find the table shortened. One candelabra where a forest of silver had stood. The library curtains drawn back for the first time in years. He stopped in the doorway a long moment. "This is an improvement," he said. Then, after a silence, "My mother used to keep it exactly like this. Before, it was the second door he had opened, only a crack, and shut again before she could see through it." Before what? She learned, in the weeks that followed, to read him the way she had once read Farnall's failing roof, by the smallest signs. He worked later on the nights it rained. He avoided the east wing entirely, though no one told her why it mattered. Once, passing his study, she heard him speaking to no one, low and urgent, and when she knocked, he was alone at his desk. A single, unopened letter turned face down beneath his hand. Their first weeks were not without small, unspoken tendernesses either. One morning she came down to breakfast with 2 fingers wrapped in a strip of linen. Thorn cuts from the rose beds she hadn't mentioned to anyone. She said nothing about it at the table. The following morning, she woke to find every climbing rose along the east terrace already pruned back. clean and thornless where her hands would next reach for them. No note, no mention of it at dinner. Just the roses, already done. She understood the sentence it was saying, without a single word attached to it. I saw. I did something about it. I will not make you thank me for it. Late one night that same week, she fell asleep over the estate ledgers in the library, her cheek against an open page of figures. She woke past midnight to find her husband's greatcoat laid over her shoulders, still warm from his own body, and the room empty. He never mentioned it. Neither did she. She simply began, without quite deciding to, leaving the ledgers open a little later each night than she needed to. A letter arrived from London not long after. Not the London letter, not yet, but one from Henriette, brief and glittering, all about a new bonnet and a gentleman named Ashworth, who had, she wrote, been most attentive at a recent card party. Louisa read it twice, folded it, said nothing to her husband about the name Ashworth at all. She only noticed with some unease that her sister had not once asked how Blackwood suited her, or whether she was happy, in 3 full pages. It was the first of what would become a small, steady current of letters. Never enough to demand attention. Always enough to remind her that Henriette had not forgotten her, nor forgiven her, and was simply waiting for the right season to do something about both. The Tinvale letter, when it finally came, arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to Jonathan in a hand she didn't recognize. He read it standing in the hallway with his coat still on, his face going the color of the parchment itself. Jonathan? It's nothing. Estate business. He folded it twice and put it inside his coat. She noticed, because she noticed everything, that his hand was not quite steady when he did it. She said nothing. She had learned, from years of watching her own father carry secrets badly, exactly how a lie sat on a man's shoulders. She recognized the posture instantly. That night, she brought him tea in his study. He was hunched over a ledger, but his eyes weren't moving across the page. You needn't do that. There are servants. I know. But the servants aren't your wife. The word hung between them. The Tinvale mine has flooded again, he said finally. The pump has failed. It will cost a fortune to repair. A fortune I don't have. True. But not, she suspected, the whole of what was sitting in his coat pocket upstairs. You didn't trap me, she said. I walked in with my eyes open. I chose this. Jonathan, he corrected, barely audible. You didn't trap me, Jonathan, and you're not alone in this anymore. He looked at her a long moment, weighing whether to hand her the rest of it. The letter, the physician's name signed at the bottom. He didn't. Not that night. But he reached for her hand across the desk and held it, and that, for now, was its own kind of confession. He coughed twice into his sleeve before she left the room, quietly, as though hoping the sound would go unremarked. It didn't. 3 nights later, she found his handkerchief left forgotten on the washstand and picked it up only to fold it away properly. That was when she saw it. Small, rust-colored, already dried into the linen. She stood very still for a long moment. Then she folded the handkerchief. Corners aligned, exactly the way she had once folded a letter back into her father's drawer, and she said nothing. Not yet. Not until she understood what she was looking at, and what it would cost him to hear her say it out loud. She asked to see the mine herself the following week. He resisted at first. No place for a duchess, he said, the tunnels cold and the work grim, until she pointed out that she had run a household on nothing for 3 years, and was unlikely to faint at the sight of a coal seam. They rode out on a morning sharp with frost. The Tinvale works sat at the bottom of a valley, like a wound the land hadn't finished healing. The foreman, a broad man named Hendricks, greeted the Duke with the wary respect of a man used to bad news arriving in fine coats. Pump's holding for now, Your Grace, but she's laboring badly. If she gives out before Monday, we lose the lower gallery entirely, and 40 families lose the roof over their heads with it. Jonathan's jaw tightened. The way Louisa had learned to read as fear dressed up as composure. Louisa walked the length of the works that morning, asking questions Hendricks had plainly never been asked by anyone above the rank of engineer. How old the pump housing was, whether the flooding came from the same tunnel each time, what lay beneath the lowest gallery. She thought she had an answer within the fortnight. An old drainage channel, mentioned once in a surveyor's ledger from decades before, that might be reopened to draw the water off entirely. Hendrix's men cleared what they could find of it in 6 days, jubilant, certain the crisis had passed. 2 nights later, the lower gallery flooded worse than it ever had. The old channel had simply redirected the water into a second collapsed seam no one had mapped in 100 years. Hendrix stood in the mud at dawn, his face gray. "We're worse off than before, Your Grace. I don't know what else there is to try." Jonathan said nothing, but Louisa saw, for the first time since she'd married him, real despair cross his face. Undisguised, the fear of a man watching the one thing he'd worked 5 years to save slip through his fingers, regardless of what he did. She did not have a second answer that night. She only had the first one, proven wrong, and 40 families whose roofs now depended on whatever she found next. On the ride home, he was quiet for a long while. "You didn't have to come," he said finally. "No," she agreed, "but you didn't have to marry a woman who'd asked to." He looked at her, something unguarded crossing his face before he could stop it. "No," he said, "I didn't. Before the story goes on, tell me, do you think Louisa finds a second answer in time, or does the mind take everything with it? Leave your guess. I'll tell you soon enough whether you were right." London descended on them both like a verdict. Their townhouse on Grosvenor Square glittered with gilt and mirrors. Society studied Louisa's plain gowns with sharp, hungry eyes and whispered behind their fans. Their first true test came from a dinner Jonathan was obliged to host for 3 investors whose capital he needed to keep Tinvale afloat until a proper repair could be found. It was meant to be simple. It became, instead, nearly a disaster. The cook fell ill an hour before the guests arrived. Half the promised dishes were reduced to nothing, and Jonathan paced the hall in a barely concealed panic that had nothing to do with soup and everything to do with the fortune riding on the impression they made that night. Louisa did not pace. She went to the kitchen herself, in her second-best gown, and within the hour had turned the remaining courses into something simple, elegant, and entirely sufficient. It was at that same dinner that Jonathan, flushed with relief and wine, introduced her to one of the investors with a careless warmth he didn't think twice about. "My wife manages the household beautifully," he said, and moved on to business before the words had even finished leaving his mouth. Louisa smiled through the rest of the evening. She said nothing until the guests had gone, the door had shut, and the 2 of them stood alone in the quiet hallway. "You forgot to mention I manage your estate too," she said. Quiet, not sharp, which somehow made it worse. "The mine, the accounts, the tenant repairs you signed off on without reading, because you trusted my numbers over your own stewards. You called me a housekeeper in front of men who will remember exactly that, and nothing more, the next time your name is mentioned." Jonathan opened his mouth to explain, and found for once in his life that he had nothing ready to say. He didn't apologize that night either, in words. But for the following week, in every room they entered together, in front of every guest, he made a small, deliberate point of it. "My wife found the channel that may yet save Tinvale. My wife keeps books better than any clerk I've hired. My wife noticed what I did not." He said it so often, so plainly, that by the 3rd week, London had quietly stopped whispering about the plain gray Duchess's face and started whispering instead about her mind. It was not romance, not exactly. It was something steadier. Proof that whatever else this marriage was, it had become a partnership neither of them could hold up alone, flaws and all. Then Henriette arrived, uninvited, more beautiful than ever. "Louisa, darling," she cried, sweeping in for an embrace, her gaze already cataloging the room like a woman doing sums she couldn't make balance for herself. Later, alone with her mirror, Henriette sat and did not admire her own reflection for once. She simply stared at it. 22 years old, and the whispers had already started at home, not yet settled. And her sister a duchess. Her campaign began quietly. Sweetness to Louisa's face, poison behind her back. Poor Louisa, it's a miracle the Duke noticed her at all. One does wonder what hold she has over him. Invitations thinned, whispers thickened. "I'll send her away," Jonathan growled, after an afternoon that left Louisa pale. "No," Louisa said. "That's precisely what she wants. We'll be neither tyrant nor victim. We'll simply be." But Henriette wanted more than whispers. She wanted a stage, and found one in Lady Maricella's ballroom, the most coveted invitation of the season, armed with a young lieutenant whose gambling notes she now quietly held. She had no notion that someone else in that room already held a note of his own. Lady Maricela had taken Louisa's measure over tea weeks earlier, discussing Italian painters and estate management rather than gossip, and delivered her verdict with a brisk pat to the hand. "You'll do. The boy needed a backbone in his life. He's chosen well." Louisa descended the stairs that night in forest moss green, a gown Jonathan had commissioned without telling her, and he stopped breathing for a moment. "Louisa, you are beautiful." He had never said it before. It warmed her more thoroughly than any fire. They danced, and the world fell away, until Henriette steered the trembling lieutenant into view. "Oh, Louisa, I was just telling the lieutenant how you two used to walk together, those long walks by the river. A lie built from a single polite refusal. In this room, it grew wings instantly." Louisa looked to Jonathan, and for one terrible instant, saw doubt cross his face. "He believes it. He believes it, after everything. And yet," she said, steady, carrying, "you're mistaken. The lieutenant and I were barely acquainted, and you know it. Your memory must be failing. Why? I recall you writing his name in your journal." The overreach that undid her. Jonathan stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. "My wife does not lie, and she does not keep a journal. She is far too practical for such sentimentality." He turned to the lieutenant. "A word of advice. When you sell your honor, ask a higher price. The note for your debts, which I now hold, was for a paltry £500. Your reputation, it seems, was worth even less." He produced the folded paper. The lieutenant went the color of old paper himself. Then to Henriette, whose face had begun to drain of color. "You speak of my wife's past. Perhaps we ought to discuss yours." A pause that stretched unbearably. "I arrived at Farnall a day early. I stood in your garden that evening. I heard a rather interesting conversation about a certain Lord Ashworth, about a duchess's little secrets." So he had known. From the very first hour. He had chosen her anyway. Henriette went white, understanding dawning. She had been overheard, caught in the very trap she'd built for someone else. "I chose my wife, Miss Holt," Jonathan continued, quieter now, though every syllable carried. "Not for her beauty, though she is the loveliest woman in this room. Not for connections, for she had none. I chose her for her character, her honesty, for a quiet dignity you could not comprehend in 1,000 years." He turned, lifted Louisa's hand to his lips. "She is my duchess. I would thank this room to remember it." Henriette fled the ballroom in tears. As the music rose again, Jonathan pulled Louisa close. "I'm sorry you ever had to doubt. I didn't, not really. I love you, Louisa. I think I have since that evening on the bench, watching you be brave in the dark." The bench. He had just confessed to watching her in front of the entire ton, and still there was a folded handkerchief upstairs, stained rust-colored, that he had told no one about. And still there was one more door neither of them had opened yet. A door that went back further than either of them yet understood. He told her the rest of it 3 nights after the ball, after the household had gone to bed, in the study, over the same untouched tea. "My mother did not simply die," he said. "She was ill for a year before it, and I was in London the whole of it, chasing creditors, saving a house she'd have gladly seen burn if it meant I came home. I got back 4 days before the end. She asked me once, near the last, whether the estate had been worth it." He looked at the fire, not at her. "I never answered her. I've been trying to answer her ever since, I think. That's the whole of why I spent 5 years working myself into the ground for a house full of strangers' debts." Louisa said nothing for a moment. Then, "And the letter, the one that came on a Tuesday." His eyes came up, startled she'd noticed at all. "A physician in Harley Street," he admitted. "A cough that hasn't left since spring. He wanted me examined properly before it worsened. I put it off. I told myself the mind mattered more." "It doesn't," Louisa said, quiet and immovable as stone. She reached into her sewing basket and produced the folded handkerchief, the rust-colored stain still visible in the lamplight. "I found this 3 nights ago. I have known longer than you think, Jonathan. I was only waiting for you to trust me with it yourself." He stared at the small square of linen a long moment, and something in him seemed to give way entirely. Not collapse. Release. The way a held breath finally leaves a body that has forgotten it was holding one. "How long have you carried that alone?" he asked. "Waiting for me?" "Since the night I folded it and put it away exactly the way I found it," she said. "It's what I do. I notice things and I wait for people to be ready to talk about them. I have been waiting my whole life for someone to notice that back." "I noticed," he said. "The roses. I noticed." "I know," she said. "That's how I knew I could wait for the rest." He went to London within the week, this time with her beside him, rather than hidden from her. The physician's verdict, when it came, was cautious rather than dire. A weakness in the lungs to be watched and treated, not a sentence to be endured alone. But it was enough to teach Jonathan, finally, that a burden shared weighed less than a burden hidden, whatever the ledger said. Then, 3 days after they returned from London, a second letter arrived. This one addressed to Louisa. In handwriting she recognized instantly, though she had not seen it in over a decade. It was from her mother's late correspondent, an elderly woman in York who had once been governess to both Louisa and, years earlier, to a boy she called only Master Jonathan. Louisa read the letter twice, then a third time, her hands going cold. The winter she was 15, a stranger boy of perhaps 17 had lodged 3 nights at Farnell during a snowstorm. On his way north with his dying mother, in a hired carriage too fragile to risk the roads after dark. Louisa, the only one awake at that hour, had sat up with the boy in the kitchen while the household slept, sharing the last of the bread, asking nothing about who he was or where he was going, only sitting with him so he would not have to sit alone with his fear. She had never learned his name. He had never given it. He had left before dawn, and she had thought of him, on and off, for years, as simply the boy from the snowstorm. She brought the letter to Jonathan with her hands still cold. He read it once, then sat very still for a long moment. And when he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes that he did not bother to hide from her. "I remember the bread," he said. "I have remembered the bread for 11 years. I did not remember your face until I saw you kneeling in that garden with your thumb bleeding and said nothing about it. Something in me simply knew." "Do you understand what that means?" he asked her. "It means," she said slowly, "that you did not choose me at Farnell at all. You chose me 11 years before you ever knocked on that door. And you spent every year since trying to find your way back to a girl who never even knew your name." Neither of them said anything else for a long while. There are some silences a story does not need to fill. She did not forget the mine, even now. Through that winter, while Jonathan wrestled with fresh worry over the flooded lower gallery, Louisa spent her evenings in the restored library, candles burning low, working through box after box of old estate surveys Mrs. Graves had unearthed from the muniment room, deeds, drainage records, letters between long-dead stewards, most of it dry as the dust it had sat under. She almost missed it a second time. A single line, in a different surveyor's hand, dated decades after the first, correcting an old error in the original channel's direction, and naming a second, untouched route entirely, one that bypassed the collapsed seam altogether. She brought it to Jonathan at midnight, still in her dressing gown, the paper clutched so tightly it had crumpled at the edges. "This could still be nothing," she said, before he could speak. "I was wrong once already. I don't want to promise you a miracle twice." He read it twice, standing by the fire. And when he looked up, his face held something she hadn't seen there before. Not simply hope, a kind of stunned gratitude. As though he had forgotten it was possible for a problem this size to have a second door out of it, after the first one had already failed them both. "You were wrong once," he said, "and you came back anyway. That is the whole of what I love about you, Louisa. Not that you're always right, that you never once stop looking." Hendricks and his men cleared the second channel in 9 days. Cautious this time, testing every foot of it, before trusting it with the weight of the water. It held. The flooding that had been drowning the lower gallery finally found a different, older way home, and the Tinvale mine, and the 40 families who depended on it, did not go under after all. Louisa wrote to her sister once more that spring. A short, careful letter. Not forgiveness exactly, but an offer of it, left open like a door she did not expect to be walked through soon. It would be some months before she learned whether it had even been read. 1 year later, autumn light poured gold through the tall windows of the Blackwood Library. Restored now down to the last shelf, Louisa sat by the fire, watching her husband on the floor, offering a carved wooden bird to a gurgling infant with a soft crown of dark hair and unmistakably stormy gray eyes. The tenants had taken to leaving small offerings at the kitchen door in the weeks after the second channel held. A basket of late apples, a jar of honey, once a hand-carved whistle for the child not yet born, left by a miner's wife who walked 2 miles to deliver it and refused to give her name. Farnell had been sold. Sir Alistair and Lady Holt lived out their days in a modest, solvent cottage in Bath. Louisa never told her father she'd found that second letter, nor what she'd since learned of it. An earlier, lesser offer, quietly declined the same week the Velmore contract arrived, because he had gambled, foolishly, secretly, and for once entirely in her favor, on something better for her. She let him believe he'd earned her gratitude some other way. Some secrets, she had decided, were kinder left exactly where they lay. Henriette had married a wealthy merchant twice her age. 3 letters had gone unanswered. The 4th came back with a single line beneath Louisa's signature. "Tell me about the baby." Nothing more. But it was a door opening the smallest possible amount, and Louisa had already begun composing her reply. Jonathan looked up and caught his wife's eye, and smiled. Not the almost smile of a year ago. Something whole, reaching all the way to his eyes. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her, their son wedged comfortably between them. "A girl in a gray dress," she said, "sitting on a stone bench in a ruined garden, being watched by a man pretending to be someone else, and not knowing she'd already met him once before, in a kitchen, in a snowstorm, years before either of them had anything worth losing. I think about her all the time," he said. How lucky the man was to find her twice. "He wasn't lucky," Louisa corrected gently. "Neither of us were. We were just the only 2 people paying attention, both times." Outside, the last of the season's roses still clung to the garden wall, and the light held a moment longer than it had any right to. Thank you for staying with this one all the way to the end. Tell me, which secret surprised you most? Did you guess the boy in the snowstorm before Louisa did? And where in the world are you watching from tonight? If you love elegant historical romances, hidden family secrets, slow-burn love stories, dukes and duchesses, and quiet, unforgettable endings, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.